The night Lionel Messi lifted the World Cup, he didn't smile right away. He sank to his knees, sobbing into the grass because for over 20 years, he thought he wasn't enough. This is the true story of a boy whose silence almost cost him everything, and the quiet power that turned him into the greatest of all time. You'll discover the napkin that rewrote his future the moment he almost quit the game forever, and the haunting reason why Argentina once called him a traitor. But could Lionel Messi survive when even home turned its back on him? Before the cameras, before the stadiums, before the 8 Ballon d'Ors, there was a boy with a needle in his leg. Not a soldier, not a patient, just a child who wanted to play. Lionel Messi was 9 when his body started breaking a promise it never meant to keep. While his friends got taller, he stayed still shrinking, not in size, but in spirit. His family lived in Rosario, Argentina, city of love and labor, but never luxury. The kind of place where a dream felt more like a rumor. His father, Jorge, worked at a steel factory. His mother, Celia, cleaned houses. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And they had football passed down like a family recipe. Every afternoon, while the sun melted into orange dust, young Lionel would lace his boots. Boots 2 sizes too big, hand-me-downs from his older brothers. He'd dribble past invisible defenders on cracked pavement, sometimes barefoot, always smiling. He didn't talk much, but the ball understood him. At age 5, he joined his dad's team grandly. It wasn't fancy just medal goals and chalk lines, but to Leo, it was sacred, a place where he felt weightless. His grandmother, Celia, his biggest believer, was always on the sidelines, clapping louder than anyone. She told the coach, "Put him in." When they hesitated, she said it again softer, but firmer, "Put him in." That day, Lionel scored 2 goals in less than 10 minutes. Not because he was fast, not because he was strong, but because he danced. He danced with the ball like it was a part of him. Even then, it was like the game spoke only to him, whispering roots no one else could hear. That same day, Celia kissed his forehead and said, "They'll know your name one day." A few months later, she was gone. A heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. Lionel didn't cry in front of anyone, not even at her funeral. But after that, he stopped talking altogether. And every goal he scored after, he pointed to the sky. At 7, he joined Newell's Old Boys' first real club. And for a while, things were good. He was small, yes, but magical. Coaches called him La Pulga, the flea, not because he was a pest, but because he was impossible to catch. Then came the checkups, the blood work, the quiet voice of a doctor who frowned too long. "Your son has a growth hormone deficiency." They said it slowly, like he wouldn't understand. But Leo understood one thing: he might never grow again. And suddenly, the boy who moved like wind felt like stone. The treatment was brutal. $1,000 a month money the Messis didn't have. Each night, Jorge would pull out the vial and the syringe. Leo would turn his face to the wall, and Celia's voice was nowhere to be found. Needle after needle, leg after leg. He was 11 years old with track marks like an old man. The shots were supposed to help him grow, but they also made him sick, nauseous, cold, alone. He never told his teammates, he just ran faster. One night, after practice, Leo heard the coach whisper, "He's too small," not to him, about him. And that night, Lionel didn't sleep. He just stared at the ceiling, wondering if the game he loved was already slipping away. A game he didn't know how to live without. River Plate showed interest but backed off when they saw the medical bills. So did every club in Argentina. Newell's stopped paying for his treatment. Even the coaches who praised him looked the other way. And slowly, the Messi family ran out of options. Jorge refused to give up. He sent tapes, letters, desperate pleas to clubs across the ocean. One day, a scout from Barcelona replied, "Bring him, let's see." So they flew, father and son, alone with one suitcase. 13 years old, a heart full of hope, a body still too small. The trial was electric. Messi glided across the pitch like it was home. The coaches watched, spellbound. But the board hesitated. Paperwork, insurance, bureaucracy. So Lionel kept playing and secretly kept shrinking inside. A week passed, no decision. Jorge booked flights home. Then, just hours before they were supposed to leave, Barcelona sporting director Carlos Rexach scribbled a contract on the only paper he could find, a napkin. That napkin saved everything. It promised a future, promised treatment, promised hope. But it also cost him home. His mother stayed in Rosario with the other kids, and Leo stayed in Spain with only football to talk to. La Masia, the academy, was a palace of silence for Lionel. He didn't speak Spanish well. He didn't eat in groups. He missed his mom, missed Celia, missed the smells of his home. His teammates called him Enano Dwarf, not cruelly, just honestly. He didn't fight back, he just played. And every time he touched the ball, he remembered Celia. He traced her initials into his cleats with a marker. And when he scored, he'd look up just for a moment, because she was still watching. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Leo snuck onto the training ground. He didn't bring a ball, just walked barefoot on the grass, laid down at midfield, and whispered, "Don't forget me." He didn't know who he was talking to. There are two things he kept secret back then. One was the letter he wrote but never sent, the one addressed to his mother. The second, we'll get to that. But just know it changed everything about how he played. The boy who stopped growing was now surrounded by giants. But something inside him, something small but stubborn, refused to break. He wasn't ready to be a star. He wasn't ready to be famous. He just wanted to be enough. And that quiet fire was about to wake the world. The dormitory lights would go out at 10, but Lionel would stay awake longer, eyes open in the dark, listening. He listened to the soft hum of city traffic outside the academy window, to the beds creaking around him as other boys fell asleep, to the ache inside his chest that didn't have a name yet. It was the sound of missing someone without knowing how to say it. He was 13, but his heart still lived in Rosario. He missed his brothers fighting over the TV remote, missed his mother's cooking, the smell of onions and warm bread after school, missed the sound of his father closing the front gate at night, and most of all, he missed the voice that used to cheer loudest from the sidelines. His grandmother's name was Celia. She had been gone for years, but she stayed with him in small ways. A bracelet he wore under his sleeve, the number 10 on his back. The way he looked up after scoring. Every room he entered, he imagined her there, just outside the frame, watching quietly. He didn't tell anyone. It was something sacred, something he kept just for himself. At La Masia, the other boys laughed together easily. They teased each other in fast Catalan and traded stories about home. Lionel sat at the edge of the dining hall, his fork quiet on the plate. He understood the words, but didn't know where to place his own voice among them. So he stayed silent, letting the food go cold while thoughts drifted far away. In training, it was different. The ball spoke a language he understood perfectly. When the whistle blew, everything else faded: the homesickness, the noise, the quiet inside him. He danced between defenders like a boy chasing shadows. He wasn't the biggest or the fastest, but something about the way he moved made people stop and watch. Still, some coaches thought he was too quiet. They wanted more noise, more fight, more leadership. But Leo didn't play to impress. He played to feel safe. Each dribble was a breath, each goal a way of saying, "I'm still here," even if his voice never left his lips. One evening, after a cold training session, he sat alone by the lockers. His socks were soaked, his legs sore. Another boy walked past without saying a word. Lionel looked down at his cleats and quietly traced her initials into the mud. Celia, always Celia. The trainers noticed he was limping more often. Not because of injury, but because of the injections. Every night, he still gave himself the hormone shots in his thighs. His father, back in Rosario, called every Sunday to check on him, but Lionel never mentioned the pain. He didn't want to worry them. His mother's voice came through the phone like a distant lullaby. She would ask what he ate, if he had friends, if he was warm at night. He always said yes to all of it. Then stared out the window, wishing it was true. He missed her in a way that hurt most when things were going well. There was one coach, though, who started to see the boy behind the silence. He didn't ask Lionel to speak more or act louder. He just watched, listened, noticed how Leo stayed behind after practice, how he arranged the cones after everyone else had left, how his gaze softened whenever the ball touched his feet. "Don't rush him," the coach told the others. "He's not a storm, he's the wind." And slowly, others began to see it too. Not just the goals, but the way he carried something deeper. Like he was playing for someone who had never left. The academy room he slept in was small, a single bed, a wooden desk. Taped to the wall was a picture of his family, slightly faded. Next to it, a small plastic rosary his mother had packed in his bag. He didn't pray much, but he held it when the nights felt heavy, when the homesickness came in like a slow wave. He had one friend, for a while a boy, named Jordy. Jordy talked too much, laughed loudly, and never asked why Leo didn't. They'd sometimes sit in the corner of the field, sharing orange slices after practice. One night, Jordy asked him, "Do you miss home?" Lionel didn't answer, but his eyes did. Then Jordy left. Cut from the academy a month later. No goodbye, no warning. Lionel came back to the field and sat alone. The orange slices stayed in his bag that night. He never shared them again. But something shifted in those months. His body started to grow. Slowly, then faster. The shots were working. The pain was still there, but so was progress. He stretched a little taller, grew a little stronger, and every inch felt like a miracle he couldn't explain. Still, he stayed quiet. Even when reporters came by, even when scouts wrote his name down, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing peace. And peace, to him, lived in the space between passing and receiving. In the silence after a goal, there was one night he never forgot. A winter storm outside, sheets of rain on the window. He had just come back from scoring 2 goals in a youth match. No one came to watch, no cheers, no lights. But he sat at his desk, pulled out his journal, and wrote just one line. I hope she saw it. That journal held things no one knew. His drawings, his memories, and one letter folded hidden deep. It was written to someone he never showed it to. Not yet, but that letter would change something years later. He started getting calls from higher-level coaches, whispers of a promotion, talks of a debut. But all he could think about was the way his grandmother used to say, "The world is too loud, let your feet speak." And that's what he did, day after day, match after match. Sometimes the pressure built quietly, like steam behind a door. The more people expected, the less he felt like himself. They wanted him to be louder, bolder, bigger. But Leo didn't know how to become something he wasn't. He only knew how to play. So he played and waited and whispered in his own way, "Watch me." And they did, even if they didn't always understand what they were seeing. In his second year at the academy, someone new walked in. A name we'll talk more about soon. But just know this, that meeting changed not just his game, but his entire idea of what it meant to be seen, what it meant to be believed in. But before that moment came, there was still one more silence he had to carry, one more wound, one more quiet heartbreak, the kind that doesn't scream it, just settles deep and stays, waiting for the right moment to be understood. He wasn't ready yet, but something was coming, a pass, a moment, a light, something that would shake the silence and let the world hear him at last. The mornings in La Masia always started the same way, a soft knock on the door, the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen downstairs, and the quiet sound of boots being tied in the hallway outside. Lionel would open his eyes before the alarm, heart already awake. Not from excitement, but from the habit of waiting for something that never came. His room was still small, his bed neatly made, just like his mother taught him. Above it, the same fading photo of his family. Next to it, a single jersey pinned on the wall, number 10, red and black, from Newell's Old Boys. It smelled faintly of dust and sweat, even though it hadn't been worn in years. Some nights, he would lie there and stare at it, as if it still held part of who he was. Outside, the pitch waited. Even on rainy days, even when others groaned about early drills, Leo walked with a quiet hunger. He didn't speak much in the locker room, but on the field, something shifted. His body moved like it remembered joy, even when his heart was heavy. And the ball always stayed close, like it knew not to leave. The coaches noticed something unusual. He didn't celebrate like the others. No fists in the air, no dances, just a small nod, sometimes a look to the sky. One coach once asked, "Why don't you cheer more?" Leo just shrugged and whispered, "Because the goal wasn't for me." Each day was built from small pieces drills, meals, short naps, lonely thoughts. But inside those quiet routines, something was building, a shape, a skill, a sense of self that no one else could quite explain. He still didn't say much, but every pass he made said, "I see you." And every run said, "Please, don't look away." Then came Ronaldinho. He arrived like sunlight after a long winter. Big smile, loud laugh, hair that danced in the wind. He didn't just play, he celebrated. lifted, lit up the field. And when he watched Lionel for the first time, he didn't laugh or clap. He just nodded slowly and said, "He's different." Ronaldinho was already a star. But one afternoon after training, he walked over and handed Leo a bottle of water. "Play with me tomorrow," he said. "Let's see what happens." Leo didn't answer, just nodded, heart pounding. It was the first time someone asked him to shine. The next day, they played together. It wasn't a match, just a scrimmage, no crowd, no cameras, but something clicked, like two instruments finding the same melody. Ronaldinho danced forward. Leo glided beside him. Pass, return, spin, goal, over and over. After practice, Ronaldinho put his arm around him and said something that would stay forever. "Don't change, ever. Not for them, not for anyone." Leo didn't say anything back, but later in his room, he wrote those words down in his notebook. Right under a drawing of his grandmother's face, a soft reminder that someone else now believed. As months passed, things started to move faster. Whispers from first-team coaches, murmurs in the hallways. "You've seen the kid? He's like a ghost with the ball." But fame didn't find him overnight. It crept in through shadows, and with it came pressure he didn't know how to name. He still got sick often, nerves mostly. Before big training days, his stomach would twist in knots. Sometimes he would quietly throw up before stepping on the field, then wipe his mouth and smile. No one asked. He never offered the truth. Pain was something he learned to carry in silence. One memory stood out, simple but deep. It was raining again. He had forgotten his cleats inside. By the time he ran back for them, the others had gone. He stood in the hallway, dripping wet, holding his shoes like a child clinging to a stuffed animal. Then, without thinking, he whispered, "Celia, are you proud?" He didn't expect an answer, but in that moment he felt less alone. The halls echoed with footsteps, but none stopped by his door. And yet, something about that whisper made him feel taller, as if he was no longer trying to be just trying to become. And becoming, he learned, doesn't always make noise. The promotion came one Thursday afternoon. A coach pulled him aside after lunch and said, "They want you with the seniors." Leo nodded, eyes wide. Inside, he was shaking, not with fear, but with something deeper, the kind of nervousness that comes when dreams start turning real. His first time walking into the first-team locker room, he carried his bag like it was made of glass. Big names sat around him, grown men with cars and fans and contracts. He stayed quiet, sitting in the corner. Then Ronaldinho walked in, grinned, and said, "My brother's here." And just like that, the room felt a little smaller. The first match was just a friendly, not many people in the stands, but his heart pounded like a stadium was watching. He touched the ball 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Each time the crowd gasped, not loud, but sharp, like they knew they were seeing something new. Then it came, the pass, the goal, the beginning. Ronaldinho set him up, and Lionel chipped the ball gently over the keeper. Time slowed, the net rippled. His teammates shouted, and Leo just stood there, like a boy watching his dream walk through the door. After the game, a reporter asked how it felt. He smiled, nodded once, and said it was for her. He didn't say who, but in his mind, the image was clear: Celia, hands clapping, smile wide, voice echoing. She would have cried, but only a little. That night, in his room, he wrote in his journal again. Not much, just one sentence. "Maybe I belong here now." He left the window open and let the wind turn the pages. It felt like a sign when it stopped right on the drawing of his old bedroom in Rosario. But even with that spark, doubt still lingered. He wondered if this was the start, or just a moment that would fade, if his silence would always follow him, if people would ever love him the way they loved louder stars. And there was one more fearsome thing he hadn't told anyone. It had to do with Argentina, with the feeling that even as Spain embraced him, his homeland might forget. A fear that would grow louder in time, but for now, he pushed it away. Because the next game was coming, and the world was starting to look. And yet, even with the ball at his feet and a goal behind him, he still felt something missing. Not a person, not a place, but a question. Something unspoken, something waiting. And soon, that question would demand an answer. There's a certain kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from being alone too long. That was the silence Lionel knew best during those first few years in Barcelona. Even as his feet found rhythm, his heart often felt out of place. Each day began with the same steps. Wake up before sunrise, shower quietly, pack his bag with clean socks and shoes. He walked the halls of La Masia as if floating through a dream. The same tiled floors, the same soft smell of toast from the kitchen. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't know what to say. Every word felt like it had to be perfect. Every joke, every answer, measured. So he let the others talk. He listened. He smiled when needed and saved his voice for the pitch. With the ball, he didn't have to explain himself. Every movement, every pass, every goal spoke without words. And somehow, that was enough. At least for a little while. But even joy can feel strange when you don't have someone to share it with. He missed his brothers, missed his mother's hands running through his hair when he felt tired. He missed the sounds of Rosario the dogs barking at night, the voices in the street, the hum of his grandmother's sewing machine. Barcelona was beautiful. But beauty can still feel cold when your heart is elsewhere. There was a small drawer in his room where he kept the little things, a bracelet from his mother, a coin from his first youth match, a birthday card he had never opened, because it came the day after Celia passed. And inside the notebook he never showed anyone, tucked in the back, was a letter, unsent, unfinished, but held like treasure. The letter was to Celia. He started writing it after his first goal with the senior team. He wrote about how it felt to be hugged by Ronaldinho, how the crowd had chanted his name, but he only heard her voice, and how strange it was to feel proud and sad at the same time. He didn't finish the letter, not yet. Something in him wasn't ready. Maybe he didn't know what to say, or maybe he was waiting for a moment that would finally feel big enough. As he moved closer to the first team, people started treating him differently. Coaches watched him more closely. Teammates both admired and avoided him. Some said, "He's too serious." Others said, "He thinks he's better than us." But the truth was simple. He was just shy. Shy and scared of messing up the one thing that made him feel safe. At team meals, he sat near the end of the table. He listened to laughter and stories, nodding politely. When asked a question, he answered softly, sometimes barely above a whisper. He didn't want attention, he wanted belonging. But sometimes, even small voices go unheard. There was one day that stood out. Not for a record, but for comfort. A janitor walked by and asked, "Why not go rest?" Lionel shrugged and said, "I like it here. It wasn't just the game. It was the quiet it gave him. The calm between expectation and fear. The feeling that, with the ball, he was never truly alone." That week, he got injured during a scrimmage, a minor sprain. Nothing serious, but it meant a few days off. He spent them sitting in his room, icing his ankle, staring out the window. The city moved outside fast and loud, but his world slowed down, and in that stillness, a small sadness grew. He started to wonder what his life would look like if he stopped playing. Not because he wanted to, but because it scared him to think about. Without the field, would anyone know him? Would anyone care? The questions circled like quiet shadows. Then came a letter from home. His mother had written it by hand, careful and sweet. She didn't talk about football. She asked about his friends, his meals, his sleep. And at the end, she wrote, "We don't miss the goals, Leo. We miss you." He read that line over and over, then folded it and placed it next to Celia's letter. It rained that night, a steady, soothing rain that made the roof sing. He lay in bed, listening, heart full and tired. Outside, the lights of the city blinked softly, and for a moment, he didn't feel quite so far away. In training, his skills grew sharper, his timing more precise, but the coaches began pushing him harder. They expected not just brilliance, but control, presence, leadership. They wanted more noise from a boy who had only ever spoken through motion, and sometimes the pressure sat heavy on his shoulders. He didn't complain, he never did. But one day, after a long training session, he slipped into the locker room alone. He sat on the bench, breathing hard, hands shaking. Just him and the sound of water dripping from a nearby faucet. And softly, under his breath, he whispered, "I'm trying." That whisper, it wasn't meant for anyone. But if someone had been listening, they might have heard everything in it. The weight, the hope, the small voice begging to be enough. There was another secret he carried, not a shameful one, just something he hadn't shared yet, something about who he wanted to be. Not just as a player, but as a son, a teammate, a boy who once dribbled past shadows in Rosario. That secret would come to light later, but not yet. For now, he kept playing. kept passing, kept pointing to the sky, and in every match, in every moment, he gave just a little more of himself, not to prove anything, but to stay close to the quiet fire that had brought him this far. And yet, deep down, a question waited, not about skill, not about fame, but about love, about home, about whether the world could ever understand the boy behind the goals. And when that question finally rose to the surface, it would test everything he thought he knew about who he was. The stadium wasn't full. It wasn't even a real match, just a friendly tucked away at the edge of a season. The sky above Camp Nou was soft and overcast, like it didn't want to draw too much attention. But for one boy standing near the sideline, tying his boots for the 10th time, this moment felt like the edge of a new world. Lionel Messi was 17 and about to step into the light for the first time. His jersey hung loosely on his frame. Number 30, stitched in clean white, rested between his shoulders. He looked smaller than the others, almost like a child among men, but his eyes didn't waver. They scanned the field slowly, as if memorizing it, as if every blade of grass was a part of a long-held dream. The coach called him forward quietly. No big speech, just a nod and a tap on the shoulder. Lionel stood up, took a breath, and jogged to the edge of the field. The crowd clapped politely, some curious, some distracted. No one knew they were watching history walk past. The whistle blew, and he stepped onto the pitch. His first few touches were gentle, careful. He passed sideways, moved into space, adjusted his rhythm to the flow of the team. And then it happened. The ball came to him just outside the box with one defender in his path. He didn't think, he just moved. A quick shift of his hips, a soft touch past the defender, and a shot light as a breath curling toward the top corner. It missed, just wide. But the stadium made a sound, a low hum like it knew something special had just passed by. A few minutes later, another chance. Ronaldinho received the ball near midfield, then looked up. He saw Lionel sprinting down the right, quiet and fast. The pass came like a whisper, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Leo didn't hesitate this time. He chipped the ball over the keeper. It hung in the air for a second that felt like a minute, then dropped softly into the net. And for a moment, all sound fell away. Even the cheers were quiet, as if the world paused to listen. He didn't shout, didn't run wildly. He turned back to Ronaldinho, smiled, and opened his arms. The older player hugged him tightly, grinning like a proud brother. It wasn't just a goal, it was a beginning. That night, Lionel walked back to his dorm alone. The sky had cleared. The stars blinked above the quiet streets. He didn't need applause, he didn't need headlines. He just wanted to remember what it felt like to fly. And in his pocket, he carried the gloves he wore that night folded worn, warm with meaning. He sat on his bed in the dark, opened his notebook, and wrote one line. I touched something tonight that I can't explain. He drew a small goalpost in the corner of the page. Next to it, the number 30, and above it, just two letters. C and M. At breakfast the next day, some boys clapped him on the back. A few joked, we knew it, but others said less. Not out of meanness, but because when someone begins to rise, people don't always know what to say. They watch closely, they whisper softly, and sometimes they quietly pull away. Fame doesn't come like thunder. Sometimes it tiptoes in through the side door. In the form of interview requests, new locker assignments, and different looks from teammates, Lionel didn't change. But the space around him started to feel different. He was still just a boy who loved the ball, still shy at team dinners, still silent during meetings. But now, cameras began to follow him home after matches. Reporters wrote headlines using words like prodigy, savior, the next Maradona, and though he didn't say it out loud, that last one made his stomach twist. Back in Rosario, people were starting to notice too. His old club, Newell's, put his photo in the hallway. Boys at the park asked to wear his number during pickup games, and his mother, she cried while watching the replay of his first goal on a neighbor's old TV. She told her friend, he looks happy, but he also looks far away. Leo called home every Sunday, but the calls grew shorter, harder. Not because he loved them less, but because each word reminded him of what he missed. The kitchen, the dogs, the rain on the roof of their old house. His mother would always ask, "Are you eating enough?" He'd always say yes. He wasn't, not really. Sometimes nerves made him skip meals. Other times, he'd eat quickly, quietly, then sit alone with his thoughts. He missed the noise of family, the mess of it, the closeness. Barcelona had given him a chance, but it had also taken something away. One night, he had a dream. He was 10 again, standing outside the house in Rosario. It was raining, but he wasn't cold. He saw Celia waiting by the fence, holding a ball in her hands. She didn't speak, just smiled and pointed toward the gate. He woke up with tears on his face, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself cry. Not from sadness exactly, but from the weight of carrying so many moments in silence, from growing up faster than he wanted to. The next match, he played with something new in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, just a calm fire, like he had remembered why he started. He passed with ease, moved like music, and when he scored, he didn't celebrate. He just looked up and smiled softly. There was a teammate who noticed, a defender named Older, Quiet, Kind. One evening after practice, he walked beside Leo and said, "You don't have to carry it all by yourself, you know?" Lionel nodded, but didn't answer. That sentence stayed with him. He wrote it down later in his notebook, then underlined it twice. And for the first time in a while, he left the door to his room slightly open, as if he was letting something in or maybe letting something out. Even in his early days with the first team, the pressure was gentle, but growing. Every performance mattered. Every miss was watched. He began to hear things. Can he handle it? Is he too quiet? Will he last? But the only voice he listened to was still his own. And sometimes, late at night, Celia's there was one more thing he hadn't told anyone. A promise he made to himself years ago while watching an old VHS tape in Rosario. He had whispered something then barely above a breath, and that promise would soon return when everything began to change. But for now, it remained tucked away like a note waiting to be read. That winter, he hung a new photo on his wall. It wasn't of his goal or his team. It was of his family, gathered on the front steps of their house, smiling. He looked at it every night before bed, and each time he whispered, "I'll make you proud, I promise." What he didn't know was that pride would soon turn into pain, that fame would test the very heart of everything he believed, and that one place he thought would always love him might become the one that hurt the most. The letters on the jersey read Messi, but the voice in his head was unsure. In Barcelona, he was rising. The papers praised him, the coaches believed. But back in Argentina, it felt different, distant, complicated. He wore the colors of his home, but home didn't always wear him back. And for the first time, Lionel wondered if he could belong in both places or neither. His first call up to the Argentine national team should have been joyful. He packed his bag with quiet pride, folding his kit with careful hands. The sky over Barcelona was warm that day, but his heart was heavy, not with fear, but with questions. Would they see him the way he hoped to be seen? When he arrived, he didn't feel welcome. Some teammates barely spoke to him. Some called him the Spanish boy. He didn't sing loud during the anthem, not because he didn't care, but because the words caught in his throat. The match came quickly. His debut, he stepped onto the field in white and sky blue. The whistle blew. The ball came. He ran, and in just 40 seconds, he was sent off, a red card. His first moment with Argentina ended before it began. In the locker room, he sat alone. No one said much. A few patted his back, a few didn't look at him at all. He showered in silence, changed slowly, and walked out into the night without a word. He called his mother from the bus. His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. "I didn't even get to play," he said. She answered gently, "Then maybe next time will be longer." He nodded, but deep down, he wasn't sure there would be a next time. Back in Barcelona, the lights felt warmer. Ronaldinho hugged him after practice. The team joked, they smiled, but something inside him stayed dim. He missed the place that raised him, but when he returned, it had turned its back. Or maybe he had changed, maybe both. The media back home didn't help. They said he was too cold, too quiet, not like Maradona. They said he had no fire, that he didn't bleed for the shirt. And Lionel, who had only ever given everything in silence, felt his heart tighten. He read the headlines and said nothing. At night, in his Barcelona room, he opened the drawer. The old letter to Celia still sat there, still unfinished. He traced her name with his finger. "I don't know what they want from me," he whispered. And the room stayed quiet in return. One day after training, a teammate asked, "Why do you care what they say?" Lionel thought about it because it was his country, because it was his dream, because he still pictured the streets of Rosario whenever he closed his eyes. But he didn't say all that, he just shrugged. Some feelings are too big for easy words. He kept going, kept playing. In Spain, he broke records, won trophies, made defenders dizzy. Each goal was a whisper to the world that he was still here, but inside, he carried a quiet ache, the ache of not being enough for the place that mattered most. In the 2006 World Cup, he got his chance again, still young, still shy. But with each touch, he brought something electric. Fans back home smiled. Some changed their minds. And for a moment, it felt like love again. But then, he was benched. In the knockout game, he didn't start. He didn't come in. Argentina lost, and Lionel watched from the sidelines. He sat on the bench with a jacket zipped high and a heart sunk low. After the final whistle, he walked off without looking back. In the press, the questions returned. Is he really one of us? He's not like Diego. He's just another European star, and each line cut a little deeper than the last. After that, something in him changed. He still played with beauty, still passed with care. But he held back in small ways, a smile that didn't last, a gesture that never came. He started building walls, soft ones, quiet ones, but walls just the same. He wanted to give Argentina everything, but every time he did, he was told it wasn't enough. Not loud enough, not wild enough, not Argentine enough, and so he tried harder. But sometimes, trying harder only makes the silence louder. There was one evening he never forgot. He had flown home after a long tour. His mother met him at the airport. They didn't speak much on the ride, just held hands in the back seat. At home, she made his favorite meal milanesa with mashed potatoes. He ate slowly, then asked quietly, "Why don't they believe me?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, then reached out and touched his cheek. "They'll see," she said. "They'll see your heart one day." He nodded, but a part of him wasn't sure they ever would. He stayed up late that night, sitting at the kitchen table. Everyone else had gone to bed. The clock ticked softly. The air smelled like warm bread. He opened his notebook and stared at the blank page. But he didn't write, not yet. The next few years brought more pain. 3 straight finals, 3 straight losses. Copa, World Cup, Copa, again. Each time, so close. Each time, the world watched him cry. And each time, the voices got louder. You're not a leader. You never show up when it counts. You'll never be one of the greats. And Lionel believed them, at least for a while. In 2016, after the last loss, he sat on the grass for a long time. Hands on his face, shoulders still, and when he finally stood up, he walked to the locker room and whispered to a teammate, "I'm done." Later, he told the press, "I can't do it anymore." And with that, he quit the national team. The world shook, fans cried, coaches begged. The president made a public plea, but Lionel stayed silent. For weeks, he disappeared into the quiet. He didn't train, he didn't talk, he didn't smile. But something was stirring, not anger, not regret, but a memory. A letter, still tucked away. A promise, still unfulfilled. And the faint sound of a voice his grandmother's, saying, "Go on, Leo, show them." That voice would return. And when it did, it would carry him to a place he never thought he could reach. But first, he had to sit in the dark a little longer. Because some lights don't come on until we remember who we are without them. The days felt longer after he left the national team. He still trained. He still played for Barcelona. But something inside Lionel had grown quiet in a different way. Not the calm kind of quiet he once knew, but a stillness that made everything feel far away. As if a part of him had closed its eyes and wasn't sure how to open them again. He smiled during matches, passed with care, scored goals that made crowds stand, but off the field, he moved slower. He sat longer in the locker room after games. And sometimes he looked out the window with a stare that drifted beyond the city. At home, he didn't say much, Antonella noticed. His children were still young, too young to understand. But she knew. She had known him since they were kids in Rosario. And when he sat quietly at the kitchen table one evening, hands folded, eyes low, she sat beside him. "You're still carrying it, aren't you?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away, just nodded, then whispered, "I don't know who I am without the shirt." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You were always more than that." Those words stayed with him, floating behind every breath. But it wasn't until something unexpected happened that the door slowly began to open again. It came not with a shout or a grand gesture, but with a call. A quiet call from a quiet man. His name was Lionel Scalone. Not a famous coach, not a flashy man, but someone who saw things differently. He didn't call to beg, he didn't promise trophies. He simply said, "If you ever want to come back, we'll be waiting." Messi didn't answer right away. Days passed, then weeks. He wrote the coach's name on a piece of paper and tucked it into his notebook, right next to the unfinished letter to Celia. And then one night, while sitting alone on his balcony, he whispered, "Maybe one more time." He returned quietly. No press conference, no fireworks, just a name on the team sheet, a plane ride home, and a warm welcome from teammates who were younger, gentler, different. This time, something felt new. The team was different now. Less about stars, more about unity. They drank mate together, cooked asado on free nights, and sang songs that echoed softly through the halls. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it felt like family. Scaloni didn't ask Messi to lead. He didn't ask him to shout or carry the weight. He just let him be. He gave him space to breathe. And in that space, Lionel began to unfold again. There was one moment in training that said everything. A young player missed a goal and sank to the ground, hands over his face. Messi walked over, said nothing, and helped him up. Then passed him the ball and smiled. It was a small moment, but the whole team felt it. The Copa was approaching again. Messi had been here before. Finals, heartbreak. But this time, he wasn't walking in with fire. He was walking in with something quieter, but stronger, not pressure presence. Each match felt like a step toward something. He played with softness, with care, with lightness. And every time he looked up at the sky, it felt less like a question, more like a greeting. He began to laugh again, to joke, to walk into team meals with his shoulders just a little looser. They reached the final. Brazil, in Brazil. The pressure was there, but so was the calm. Before the match, he sat alone for a moment and pulled out the letter. He added one last line, folded it, then tucked it into his sock. The game was hard, physical, fast, but Argentina fought with heart, and when the final whistle blew, they had won. Messi dropped to his knees, tears filled his eyes, and the team ran to him like brothers. They lifted him into the air, chanted his name, hugged him like a child who had come home. And for the first time in his long career, he didn't look lonely. He looked full, seen safe, not just as a player, but as a person. After the celebration, he sat quietly in the locker room, not with a trophy in his hands, but with the letter. He unfolded it, read it once more, and this time he finished it. The letter to Celia, the one that had waited through years of silence. He wrote, "We did it," then folded it again, placed it in his bag, and smiled. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about remembering why he started and who had believed first. The victory changed more than just his legacy. It changed how Argentina saw him. The chants were different now, warmer. People waved his name in the streets, not as a demand, but as a thank you. A quiet apology and a louder embrace. His teammates called him Captain, but they also called him Leo. They looked to him not just for goals, but for calm, for kindness, for that soft smile after a hard moment, and he gave it freely. At home, he held his children tighter, told them stories, brought the medal home, and placed it on the kitchen counter. Not in a glass case, not behind a rope, just there, between the fruit bowl and the napkins. Where family lives, there was still more to come. More matches, more mountains. But something had shifted, not on the field, but in his heart. The part that once doubted now whispered, "You're enough." And yet, not everything was healed. There was still one place that hadn't felt the weight of his return. One moment that hadn't come yet. A tournament, a jersey, a final chance, waiting in the distance like a quiet storm. But this time, Lionel wasn't running from it. He was walking toward it, not to win back a country, not to chase a title, but to finish a chapter the way only he could, before the stadium lights, before the cheers. There were early mornings and aching legs. There were quiet walks to practice while the city still slept. There was a boy named Messi and a ball that never left his feet. After the Copa win, the world saw Messi smiling again. They saw medals, hugs, and golden trophies. But behind all that was still the same quiet routine, the same hunger, the same need to keep moving. Because for Messi, joy never came from standing still. His days were simple, even with the fame: wake early, stretch, train, then train again, long after the others had gone. He didn't talk much in the gym. He just worked, slow and steady, like someone who had learned to find peace in repetition. Some nights, when the house was still, he'd slip outside. The garden was dark, but the stars were clear. He'd juggle the ball barefoot in the grass, soft thuds against the earth. No cameras, no fans, just Messi and the silence that had always made him feel safe. The pain was still there, in small ways. Old injuries whispered back during cold weather. He wore tape around his ankles, not because it looked good, but because the past had left its marks. Each scar told a story, even if he never said the words. He never let the pain win, but he never pretended it wasn't real. There was one corner of his closet where he kept his earliest boots. Worn, scuffed, stitched back together by his mother's hands. He looked at them sometimes when things got loud. They reminded him that greatness isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in quiet places when no one is watching. At Barcelona, the rhythm was familiar. Pass, move, score, win, recover, repeat. He broke records, then broke them again. But he never pointed to himself. He pointed to the sky or passed the credit to teammates. There was one teammate, younger, full of fire and questions. He once asked Messi, "How do you stay this good?" Messi smiled, took a sip of water, and said, "I don't stop when I'm tired. I stop when it feels right." The boy nodded, not fully understanding. But one day he would. On birthdays, Messi didn't throw big parties, just cake at home, quiet songs with his wife and kids. He liked hearing their laughter. It made him feel like a boy again, like Rosario was just outside the window, and Celia was still there, clapping along to the music. But even in comfort, pressure never left. Every missed shot brought questions. Every game without a goal sparked stories. Is he slowing down? Has he lost the spark? Messi didn't respond. He just laced his boots tighter the next day and kept going. The press saw the goals, the fans saw the trophies, but the massage tables saw the bruises. The physios saw the sore muscles wrapped in ice. The mirror saw the tired eyes that still burned with quiet fire. And his heart saw every doubt and turned it into fuel. There was one moment in training that stayed with him. He had stayed after, again practicing free kicks. The sun was low, the air was cool. One by one, he placed the balls. One by one, he struck them. Not to prove anything, but to find silence in motion. That evening, the coach walked by and asked, "Why so many today?" Messi just smiled and replied, "Because I missed one last week." It was never about the crowd, never about the camera. It was about the feeling of the ball leaving his foot just right. That tiny moment when the world felt quiet and clear. He didn't need praise. He needed rhythm, the same way he had as a child. When life was complicated and the field made sense, when every kick was a way to say, "I'm here, I'm trying." That part never changed. At home, he told his children bedtime stories. Not about football, but about animals, stars, and faraway places. He wanted them to dream freely, not through his shadow, because even though the world called him legend, he was just Papa to them. He hung drawings on the fridge, watched cartoons on the couch, picked up toys after they fell asleep. Fame stayed outside. Inside, he was soft and quiet and human. And it was here, in this space, that he felt most like himself. But deep down, a new feeling was growing, a quiet tug, like a page waiting to be turned. Barcelona had been home, but even home can begin to change when the foundation starts to crack. And soon, a storm would come that no training could prepare him for. The club was struggling, financial trouble, hard choices. And one day, Messi was told the unthinkable: "We can't keep you." He sat in the office, heart still, the world slowing. He went home and sat in his bedroom, the one where his dreams had lived for 2 decades. He looked at the trophies, the photos, the letters from fans. Then he opened the drawer with his grandmother's letter. He held it for a long time, and then quietly said, "I don't want to leave." But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, endings come even when you're not ready. And so, he packed his bags, hugged his children, and walked out of the only club he had ever known. Tears filled his eyes during the farewell speech. Not because of the cameras, but because it truly broke his heart. That night, the streets of Barcelona lit candles. Fans cried, sang his name, thanked him. And Messi watched from a window, hand pressed to the glass. His world had changed. His field was gone. But somewhere inside, the ball still called his name. He moved to Paris, a new city, a new team, a new rhythm he didn't ask for. People expected magic, but he was still healing, still trying to find his feet in a land that didn't speak his quiet language. And for a while, he felt lost again. But deep inside, the work continued. In silence, in sweat, the same way it always had. Because Messi was never built from praise. He was built from practice, patience, and pain. And far off in the distance, another dream was rising. One last tournament, one last chance. Not for records, not for fame, but for something that had waited in his heart since childhood. A World Cup, a goodbye, a full circle. The calendar said 2022, but Messi's heart was in a much older place. Back to dusty fields in Rosario, where dreams were kicked through puddles. Back to quiet nights in La Masia, where he traced Celia's name into his boots. Back to long plane rides, heavy with pressure, wearing a jersey that never quite felt like it fit. Now, everything had led to this his final World Cup. He was older now, not slow, but slower, not tired, but carrying more. Lines near his eyes told stories, scars on his legs told more, and yet, something inside him felt younger than it had in years. He stood on the field in Qatar, wearing Argentina's colors again. The blue and white stripes he had worn with hope, then with pain, then with silence. But this time, there was something different in the air. Not just expectation, not just pressure, something warmer, softer, like the country had remembered how to love him. Coach Scalone didn't ask Messi to save anyone. He simply told him, lead with your heart, and Messi did. Not with loud speeches or clenched fists, but with glances, with gestures, with his feet moving in ways the world had never forgotten. The first game came Saudi Arabia, a team few expected to stop him, but football doesn't follow scripts, and Argentina lost. The locker room was still, eyes on the floor, doubt creeping in like fog. Messi sat quietly at first, then stood. He didn't yell, he didn't blame, he simply said, "We're not done." And somehow, those 3 words lit a small fire in everyone's chest. A fire that would carry them all the way. He started scoring, not just goals but moments, goals that looked like answers to old questions, goals that quieted doubt, not with force, but with beauty. And each time, he pointed to the sky, like he always had. He didn't run wild after goals anymore, he jogged, he smiled. Sometimes he just stood still, like a man who knew what it meant to wait. Like someone who remembered how long it had taken to get here, and how many tears had paved the way. In the hotel room at night, Messi stayed awake after the others slept. He watched videos of his kids laughing back home. He touched the edge of the medal from the Copa tucked safely into his bag, and he opened the small notebook he always carried. The one with Celia's letter inside, folded soft from years of holding. Before each match, he kissed the page once, folded it again, and placed it in his sock. No one knew. Not even his closest teammates. It was his way of not walking alone. His way of saying, "Stay with me." His way of remembering that even the best need someone to believe in them. Against the Netherlands, things grew sharp. Fouls, whistles, words exchanged. The game was tense, emotional, on the edge of boiling over. And for the first time, the world saw Messi raise his voice, not to boast, but to protect. He shouted, he pointed, he cupped his ears to the crowd after scoring, reminding them he was still here, still carrying every scar, still standing through every doubt, still leading not with noise, but with fire. The world watched closely. Was this the quiet boy from Rosario? The one who once spoke only through passes? Now standing tall, now speaking up, now commanding the field like a storm, moving slow and sure. Yes, it was him, just fuller now, more whole. After that game, reporters asked about the gesture. Messi didn't say much, just smiled softly. Sometimes the heart answers better with silence than with words, and his heart was answering everything now. Each match was a reply to years of misunderstanding. The semifinals came, then the final. France, a team full of stars, a stage built for legends, a story waiting to be written, one way or another. And Messi, standing at the center, hands low, eyes calm. The game began with rhythm and roar. Messi scored, then passed, then led. But France answered back. Fast, sharp. In minutes, the score was tied, then ahead, then tied again. The match turned into a storm. Extra time came, legs tired, hearts pounding. Messi scored again, his second of the night. But France came back again. It was 3-3, and penalties waited like a breath held too long. The players lined up, 5 from each team. 5 kicks to decide everything. Messi walked up first for Argentina. He didn't rush, he didn't shake, he placed the ball gently, stepped back, and whispered something under his breath. He struck it clean, soft, and low. The keeper guessed wrong. The net rippled, the crowd rose. And Messi turned, not with a scream but with a look of peace. A look that said, "Whatever happens next, I gave it everything." One by one, the penalties came. Argentina scored, France missed. Then, with the last shot, Argentina sealed it. The whistle blew, the players collapsed. And Messi stood still, eyes wide, hands on his head. Then he dropped to his knees. The grass held his weight. The sky held his tears. And his teammates rushed to him not just as players but as brothers. They lifted him high, chanting his name. And the world watching from homes, bars, streets, schools cried with him. The image would live forever. Messi, golden trophy in hand, kissed gently at the top, like someone thanking an old friend. Not out of pride, but out of quiet relief. He had finally finished the sentence he started as a boy. Back in the hotel that night, long after the noise faded, he sat alone for a while. The trophy rested beside him. He opened his notebook one last time, pulled out Celia's letter, and added a final line. "We made it, Abuela. We really did." He folded the paper slowly, held it to his chest, and let a tear fall not of sadness, but of full circle peace. He was no longer just Messi the player, he was Messi the story, the journey, the son, the father, the boy who never gave up, but there was still more ahead, not of proving, but of living. And soon, he would return to something quieter, something simpler, a kind of peace he had long waited for. The golden trophy still sparkled on the table, but inside, something had begun to feel heavy again. After the World Cup, the world wrapped Messi in praise. There were murals painted in his name, streets renamed, statues raised. Everywhere he went, people wept when they saw him, thanking him with trembling hands. And yet, in quiet moments, Messi just stood still, as if wondering where he was supposed to go next. He returned to Paris with tired legs and a heart still caught in the clouds. The celebration back home had been warm and wild, but now, back in the tall gray buildings of a city that never really felt like his things were different. The locker room felt colder, the smiles around him not always real. He kept playing, kept training, but the rhythm felt off, like a song he no longer enjoyed. He would lace his boots, stretch like always, do every warm-up right. But there was a quiet distance behind his eyes, as if his mind was still somewhere else, in a patch of grass in Qatar or a dusty street in Rosario. Some fans cheered, others began to boo. The same hands that once held his photo now held signs with questions. Why isn't he scoring more? Is he too tired? Does he even want to be here? And Messi, who had given everything, felt the sting of being doubted once again. He never snapped back, never raised his voice, but the tiredness showed in how slowly he walked off the pitch, and how rarely he smiled during interviews, and in how often he sat alone after games, headphones in, eyes closed. One afternoon, he called his wife from the car. The city buzzed around him, but his voice was quiet. "I feel far away," he said. She didn't rush to fix it. She just listened, and that was enough for now. His kids were growing fast. At home, they ran to him every evening, jumping into his arms. He kissed their heads, helped with homework, laughed during dinner. But sometimes, when they fell asleep, he stayed awake, staring out the window, asking silent questions. Was he supposed to keep going? Was there something more waiting for him? What happens after the dream comes true? He thought about it. All the trophies, the records, the cheers, and realized none of them answered the deeper question. What now? He had felt this before. As a boy in La Masia, unsure of where he belonged. As a young man in the Argentine jersey, unsure if his country believed in him. Now, once again, Messi stood at the edge of something new. Not a map, not lost, but not certain either. Paris began to feel like a stop, not a home. And with every goal he scored, it felt more like a favor than a joy. He smiled less, walked more, and behind the fame, a storm was beginning to swirl. Not around him, but inside. One match ended with a chorus of boos. He walked off the pitch, head down, hands tucked into his sleeves. His sons watched from the stands. Later, they asked, "Why were people mad at you?" And Messi couldn't find the words. He sat on the edge of their bed that night, listened to them breathe, ran his hand through their hair, and thought, maybe it's time to choose peace over pressure. Time to play where joy lives, not just where the spotlight shines. There was one drawer he hadn't opened in a while. Inside was the same old notebook, the one with the letter to Celia, now complete. He held it gently, then slipped a new photo inside a picture of his family in the living room, laughing. A different kind of trophy. Offers came in from all over, more money, bigger stages. But Messi didn't chase those things. He wanted stillness. He wanted mornings that didn't start with headlines. He began to think about what football felt like when it was pure, back in the alleyways. On the rooftop with his brothers, when it was just a ball, a dream, and an empty net. Not agents or analysts or crowded press rooms, just joy. One night, while walking home from dinner, he stopped beside a small neighborhood field. There were kids playing under a flickering light. No cameras, no crowds, just laughter. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, watching the kind of magic that doesn't make the news. That same week, a new option appeared. A club in the United States, Inter Miami. Quiet, gentle, unpolished, but there was something about it that made his heart lean forward. Not for the fame, but for the feeling. People didn't understand. Some said, "Why there?" Others said, "He's giving up." But Messi wasn't giving up. He was going back to something simpler. He made the call, signed the papers, and just like that, a new chapter began. Not louder, not richer, but warmer. The kind of chapter that reminded him who he was when it all began. He arrived in Miami with no parade, just his family, his suitcase, and a heart ready for something soft. The weather was kind, the streets felt calm, and the field, though smaller, welcomed him like an old friend. It didn't ask for miracles, just presence. At home, he cooked more, played board games, went for walks. He watched sunsets with his wife, held his children closer, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't count goals, he counted moments. But the storm wasn't completely gone. Fame doesn't fade quickly. There were still people who questioned, who poked, who asked, is this really how the story should end? But Messi didn't need to explain. He had already lived every chapter. This one was just for him. There was one night, alone on the field after training when he took off his shoes. He walked barefoot on the grass, sat down at the center circle, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the game itself. Even in the calm, he carried one more dream. A final hope that had lived in his heart since the beginning. But that would come later. For now, Messi had learned something most people never do. That even after the world gives you everything, you still have to give yourself rest. The morning light in Miami was softer than the one in Barcelona. It crept in slow, brushing across the curtains, filling the room with quiet warmth. Messi often woke before his alarm now, not from worry, but from habit. Years of early training had wired his body to rise with the sun. But in this chapter of his life, the world no longer rushed him out of bed. He'd tiptoe across the floor, careful not to wake the children. Make coffee in silence, stirring it gently with the back of a spoon. Sometimes he'd sit by the window, watching birds land on the garden fence. There was something peaceful about not being needed right away, something calming in just being still. But even stillness has its weight. Even peace has a price. And Messi, for all his calm, carried things quietly. Things no metal could erase. Things no spotlight could see. His body, once light and fast like wind, had started whispering back, not loud injuries, but quiet ones. A tagged ankle, a sore hip, a back that creaked when he stretched too far. He never told the cameras, but after games, he moved slower than before. The ice baths were colder now. The pain lingered longer. The recovery routines took more time than the matches themselves. And sometimes, when no one watched, he'd wince just tying his laces. He wasn't broken, but he was tired. There were nights he couldn't sleep, not because of noise, but because of memory. The years had left shadows. Moments he still revisited, whether he wanted to or not, like soft footsteps behind him that never went away. One memory came often one that seemed small, but stayed sharp. A game in Argentina many years ago, he had just missed a penalty in a major final. The crowd was silent. Then a few voices shouted words he never forgot. "You'll never be one of us." That night, he sat alone in the hotel hallway, hoodie up, hands shaking slightly. No one came, no one said anything. He looked at his phone, but didn't call home, didn't want to worry them. He just sat, letting the moment settle like dust on his skin. Even now, years later, it still returns sometimes, like a flicker at the edge of his thoughts. Not to hurt him, but to remind him of what he had survived. The cheers had been loud, but the silence after failure had always been louder. He once told Antonella, "The hardest part wasn't losing. It was feeling alone when I did." She held his hand then, didn't speak, just nodded slowly. Because some things don't need answers. They just need space to be felt. And Messi had learned to let the ache breathe instead of hiding it. In Miami, people smiled when they saw him. They waved, called his name, gave him space, but made him feel loved. It was different than Europe, less heavy, less sharp. But even here, old emotions sometimes followed. He still had his notebook, the same one that had traveled with him since La Masia, now worn at the edges, with pages softened by time. He kept it in a drawer by the bed, not to read often, but to know it was near. One page had a drawing of a little boy in a jersey that looked too big, standing on a small field under a huge sky. It was simple, scribbled in blue pen, but it said everything, because that boy still lived in him. Sometimes, Messi asked himself quiet questions. Had he done enough? Had he given too much? What had the game taken from him that he never got back? Not regrets, not bitterness, but reflections. There was one moment years ago that he never spoke about. A call he received after a loss. It wasn't from a coach, or a fan, or even family. It was from a child, a voice trembling with love. "Thank you for trying," the boy said. "You made me believe again." Messi never forgot that voice. Sometimes, he still wondered who the boy was. He never said his name, but the words remained, louder than any stadium chant. Because in the end, belief was always more powerful than praise. At home, the sounds were softer now. Laughter from the kitchen, the scratch of pencils on homework, the slow clink of plates after dinner, and the sound of Messi's footsteps walking from room to room, barefoot, gentle, a father, a husband. No longer just the boy with a ball, but inside, he still carried a quiet ache for the time he missed with his parents while chasing stadium lights. For the birthdays he played through, for the long flights where he sat alone, staring at the clouds, wondering what all of it was for. For the moments he couldn't get back. The trophies were many, but the cost had never been small. The weight of being called the best was never light. And there were years when he wished someone had asked how he was, not how he played. But Messi understood now that greatness asks for everything. He had learned how to smile through strain, how to win and stay kind, how to lose and still love the game. But it took a toll in places no one could see, because giving your whole self to the world always leaves pieces behind. There was one more secret he kept, one that had lived in the background for years, a dream not of a goal, or a cup, or a crowd, but of something quieter, something he would finally face in time. Now, each morning felt softer. Each walk to the training pitch felt slower, but sweeter. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He didn't need headlines. He just needed to feel the grass under his feet. Sometimes, he'd close his eyes and picture himself as a boy again. On the streets of Rosario, chasing a ball barefoot, no fans, no cameras, just the sun on his back and the sound of his grandmother clapping. And in those moments, he knew that part of him never left. But there was still a quiet pull, a final pull towards something personal, a place he hadn't returned to yet, a door he hadn't opened in a long time. And soon he'd find the courage to turn the handle. The sound of waves had replaced the roar of crowds. Each morning, Messi opened the window and breathed in the sea breeze. No press outside, no schedule written in ink, just the quiet rhythm of a home that asked nothing of him, a place where he could simply be. Miami had become more than a stop, it had become a shelter. A pause between chapters, a soft landing after years of flying without rest. And in that stillness, something inside Messi began to return. He started running again, not for training, but for joy, down neighborhood paths beside his kids on scooters, their laughter leading the way, his steps light behind them. The ball came out too, rolling across grass instead of turf. No drills, just games that ended in giggles. In the kitchen, he became slower, more present. He cracked eggs for breakfast, standing barefoot beside his youngest. Sometimes they spilled, and instead of sighing, he laughed. He folded napkins, packed lunches, tied tiny shoelaces. It was a kind of work that didn't end in trophies but felt like winning all the same. At night, his wife would find him reading quietly in the living room. Not sports articles, not interviews, just simple stories. Sometimes children's books, read aloud in soft voices. Other nights, his notebook sat beside him, open but not filled. He didn't always write, but he liked knowing it was close. There was one page he kept flipping back to, a drawing he'd made when he was still in La Masia. A small house, one soccer net, and two stick figures. One was him, the other he always imagined was Celia. He had drawn it during a lonely night when sleep wouldn't come. Now, as an adult, he traced the lines gently with his finger and whispered, "You'd like it here." The house, the laughter, the quiet peace. He imagined her sitting at the table, stirring tea, watching the boys chase the ball outside. In many ways, she never left. Messi started journaling again, not as a task, but as a release. He didn't try to write perfect thoughts, just memories, questions, small joys. Today, I played tag with Mateo. Today, I made pancakes that were slightly burned, but no one cared. Still, not everything was light. Some nights the old weight returned. He would lie awake, wondering what came next. Was this the end, or just a new way of playing? The thought both calmed and unsettled him. He didn't miss the pressure, but he missed the purpose. Not the trophies, but the push, the quiet fire that had lived in him for so long. He asked himself gently, "Am I still chasing something?" And in the silence, no clear answer came. One morning, he received a message from an old friend, a teammate from Barcelona, long retired. "Do you ever think about going back to where it started?" Messi stared at the words for a while, and that day, during his run, his steps felt slower. He was thinking. Rosario, the name lived deep in him. It wasn't just a place, it was a heartbeat, where barefoot dreams had first been kicked into motion, where his family had cheered under streetlights, where a little boy had once whispered to the stars. He hadn't returned in a long time. Not like that, not quietly. And now, something inside him longed to walk those streets again, not as Messi, the legend, but as the boy who once played with socks rolled into a ball, the boy who still lived in him. So one evening, he sat with Antonella by the balcony. The kids were asleep. The sky was dark, full of stars. He looked at her and said, "I think I need to go home." She didn't ask why, she just nodded. A week later, he flew to Rosario. No press, no team bus, no plans, just a simple suitcase, a pair of old sneakers, and his notebook tucked in beside a photo of Celia. He landed in the early morning. The air smelled the same, like damp earth and old leaves. He walked through his childhood neighborhood slowly. The houses hadn't changed much, paint peeling here. A basketball hoop still nailed crookedly there. Some neighbors waved, some stared, surprised, but no one shouted. That's what he had hoped for. He stopped outside his old house. The front gate still squeaked when touched. He stood there for a long time, remembering late dinners, birthday cakes, his mother humming in the kitchen, the warmth that had never really left him. Later, he visited the small field where he first played. It was overgrown now, the goalposts rusted, the lines faded, but the feeling was still there. He stepped onto the grass, closed his eyes, and let the past meet the present. And then, without a word, he kicked an imaginary ball into the open space. That night, he stayed with a cousin who lived nearby. They ate simple food, bread, meat, tomatoes, talked about school days, old jokes, the time Messi fell off his bike trying to juggle. They laughed. It was warm. Messi felt like time had folded itself gently around him. Before bed, he took out his notebook and added a line. "Sometimes you have to go far to realize you never left." He closed it, placed it on the windowsill. Outside, he could hear children playing down the street, their shouts echoing into the night. It sounded like music. The next morning, he walked past his old school. A teacher recognized him, invited him in. He sat in a small classroom, watched kids learning math. One boy noticed him, wide-eyed. "You're Messi," he said softly. Messi smiled. "I used to sit right there." The boy didn't speak again, just stared with awe. But Messi didn't feel like a star in that moment. He felt like a memory sitting quietly beside a new beginning, and it was enough. As he left, he turned back once, took one last look at the hallway that had once felt so big, then walked outside, letting the sunlight kiss his face. He had come looking for something, and somehow he had found more than he expected. He flew back to Miami 2 days later. Antonella met him at the door. He didn't say much, just hugged her tightly, like someone returning not from a trip, but from a deeper place. She looked at him and said, "You look lighter." He nodded. "I think I remembered who I am." And now, with that quiet clarity, Messi felt ready for the next chapter. Not because he needed to chase anything, but because he had returned to himself, not to the fame, not to the pressure, just to the boy who started it all. Back in Miami, the light felt different now. Not because the sun had changed, but because something inside Messi had. He moved slower, not from age, but from intention. He greeted each moment as if it mattered, because now it did. Every step felt like a quiet thank you to the road behind him. The world still called him a legend. Whispers of awards still floated in headlines. But Messi didn't chase them anymore. He let them come if they must, and then gently passed through them like smoke. Fame had once felt like fire. Now it felt like light through a window. His days were filled with simple things: making breakfast for his boys, sitting on the porch with Antonella. Going to practice with no need to prove anything, he smiled more, talked softly. Let laughter come easily. Because the noise had faded on, the silence was beautiful. At Inter Miami, something gentle was growing. The club was young, the players eager, the city open. He became not just a star, but a guide. He didn't shout, he didn't demand, he just played with care, and others followed his pace. In the locker room, he noticed how the younger players looked at him, not with fear, but with quiet respect. They watched his habits, his stillness, the way he listened before speaking. One of them once asked, "How do you stay humble when the whole world calls you great?" Messi smiled and answered, "Because I remember when no one did." He started arriving early, not to train, but to sit, to talk, to help. Some days he brought mate and shared it in a small circle. He told stories not of goals, but of lessons, of losing, of waiting, of staying kind. He began to see fame not as a mirror, but as a window. Not something to reflect yourself, but something to reach through. And so he began to give. Not just money, but moments, time, kindness, presence. His foundation had grown quietly over the years. Hospitals, schools, soccer fields in forgotten corners of the world. But now he wanted to be closer. He started visiting some of the kids they helped without announcements, just showing up, sitting beside them, listening. There was one visit he never spoke about. A little boy in a hospital, smaller than most, wearing an oversized Argentina jersey with a photo of Messi taped beside his bed. He was too weak to talk. So Messi just sat, held his hand, and whispered, "You're stronger than I ever was." He left behind a signed ball. But more than that, he left behind something unseen. Hope. The kind of hope only someone who has walked through storms can offer. Not loud, just real. Back home, Messi kept living simply. He gardened, watered plants slowly in the evenings. He started learning how to cook more than eggs burning things often, laughing every time. He let his kids teach him games he didn't understand. Let himself lose, just to see them glow. One weekend, he visited a small youth academy. No cameras, just a quiet afternoon. He watched the kids play, smiling at the familiar chaos of missed shots and tangled feet. Then, without warning, he stepped onto the field. No jersey, just sneakers and a soft grin. The children froze, then erupted in joy, rushing toward him like waves. They didn't ask for photos. They asked, "Will you play with us?" And Messi, the boy who once begged to be included, said yes. They split into teams. He played gently, passed carefully, encouraged the shy ones, cheered the brave ones. And after the game, he told them, "You don't have to be the best. You just have to love it." One girl asked, "Did you always know you were special?" He paused, then answered, "No, but someone else did, and that was enough." Later that night, he sat with his sons on the patio. They asked him about the old days. "Were you nervous before games? Did you cry after losses?" Messi answered honestly, slowly, like reading pages of an old book. Because the truth was better than the myth. He showed them the first boots he ever wore. The ones stitched by his mother, held them up like treasures. "These gave me more than any trophy ever did," he whispered. And his boys looked at him not as a superstar but as their dad. A few months later, an offer came in. Not from a club, not from a sponsor, from a young filmmaker making a short about resilience. They wanted to end it with a message from someone who had kept going, even when things hurt. They asked if Messi would say something. He thought about it for a day, then sent back a voice note. Not a polished speech, just a message recorded from his kitchen, kids playing in the background. He said, "It's okay to feel small. It's okay to be quiet. Just don't stop, that's all." The filmmaker cried when they heard it. People began seeing Messi differently now, not just as a record breaker, but as a soul who had walked through doubt and stayed kind, as someone who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to give. A living reminder that strength can be soft. At a press event, someone asked him, "What are you most proud of?" He paused, then answered, "That I'm still me." And in that moment, the room grew still. Because everyone understood the cost of staying yourself in a world that tries to shape you. He turned down more awards after that, skipped red carpets, said no to big interviews, not out of pride, out of peace. He didn't need more spotlight. He needed more sunrises with his family. Yet, through it all, one dream still lingered quietly. A whisper in the background, a place he hadn't fully returned to yet, a memory waiting to be made real. And soon, he would walk toward it. There was something quiet about the way Messi lived now, not just in his words, but in the spaces between them. He had learned, over time, that silence doesn't mean emptiness. Sometimes, it's where the real voice lives. The voice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. At home, the world slowed down. No more late-night flights or surprise interviews. Instead, it was grocery runs, morning routines, and picking up socks off the floor. Messi, the global icon, was just Papa against someone who knew exactly how to braid his daughter's doll's hair. And that name somehow meant more than all the golden trophies. His room was simple. A wooden shelf held a few framed photos his wedding day, the birth of his first child, his first goal at Camp Nou. There were no spotlights or medals on display, but on the nightstand rested the same notebook he'd carried since he was 13. Its pages were worn, but they still held the weight of every dream, every doubt, and every lesson. One afternoon, he opened that notebook again, not to write this time, but to read. He flipped through notes scribbled in tiny handwriting. Lines like, "I hope I'm enough," and "She would be proud." They weren't pages from a star, they were pages from a boy who never stopped wondering. Sometimes, at dinner, Antonella would catch him staring into the distance. Not lost, but remembering. She would touch his hand, and he would smile gently, like someone being pulled back into the moment. Because no matter how far he'd traveled, part of him always stood on a field in Rosario, waiting for a pass. And she was one of the few who knew what that moment had cost him. He often said little in interviews. But when a young reporter once asked, "Who is Messi when no one's watching?" he paused for a long while, then quietly said, "Just someone who still needs his family." That answer didn't go viral, but for those who heard it, it stayed. Messi's favorite spot in the house was a small corner near the window, a chair, a soft blanket, and a tiny potted tree. He had started tending to bonsai because it was trendy, but because it taught him patience. He would water it gently each morning, trim a little, step back, wait. The tree grew slowly, and that made him love it more. It didn't ask for praise. It just stayed rooted and silent, becoming itself 1 inch at a time. In many ways, Messi saw himself in that tree. There was a drawer he didn't open often. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were gifts from fans over the years, drawings, letters, a hand-stitched jersey with "thank you" written in crayon. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he would unwrap one and hold it in his hands. Not to remember who he was to them, but to remember who they were to him, the ones who believed without ever meeting him. He once got a message from a boy who had gone through growth hormone therapy. It said, "I used to feel like I was broken. Then I heard your story." Messi read it slowly. Then again, he didn't reply publicly. Instead, he added a note in his journal. Maybe my pain was a gift for someone else. His fame no longer felt like a mountain to climb. It felt like a window he could open for others. He started showing up at youth camps more often, wearing regular clothes, sitting on the grass, asking kids about their lives. Not giving advice, just listening. Because sometimes, what young people need most is not to be told what to do, but to be seen. There was one boy who reminded him of himself. Small, quiet, left-footed. The boy said, "I wish I was taller." Messi knelt down and smiled. You don't need to be tall to reach something big. Later that evening, as Messi tucked his sons into bed, his youngest asked, "Why do people love you?" He took a breath. then said, "Because I never stopped trying, even when I felt scared." The boy nodded, eyes wide. And in that moment, Messi felt more understood than he had during any press conference. His love for Antonella had also deepened in this chapter. She was the only one who had known him before the world did. The girl from his childhood neighborhood, the one who saw past the stadium lights, they had grown up together, faced storms together, and now sat side by side in quiet peace. She knew when to talk, when to hold his hand, when to just let him breathe. Every year, they returned to Rosario just for a few days, to walk the old paths, to visit family, to show the kids where their father had started, and every time, Messi would find a quiet moment to stand alone at the old field, close his eyes, and say thank you, not loud, just a whisper. To the wind, to the dirt, to the boy he once was, to Celia, whose voice still echoed in his heart. He didn't need the world to hear it, only the sky. One day, his team offered to do a documentary. He agreed, but only if it showed the soft parts, not the goals, not the trophies, but the nights he doubted himself, the hugs that held him together, the letter he never showed anyone, the one Celia wrote just before she passed, still folded gently in his notebook. He read it on camera for the first time. His voice cracked, but he didn't hide it. He finished the last line, wiped his cheek, and smiled. Then whispered, "She always said I'd become someone. She just didn't know I already was." And the crew stood silent, tears in their eyes. He had nothing left to prove, but everything left to feel. And he had learned, finally, that being loved for who you are is better than being remembered for what you did. He once said, "I'm glad I scored goals, but I'm prouder I stayed kind." And for many, that kindness became the legacy. The quiet warmth behind the spotlight, but there was still one more thing, one more chapter. He hadn't turned the page on. It didn't involve cameras or awards. It involved a promise one made long ago in a dusty backyard under fading sunlight. And now, it was time to return. The day was quiet, but it held a kind of weight. Not heavy like sadness, but full like gratitude. Messi stood at the edge of the field, one not built for thousands, but for a few. It was Rosario again, his hometown, and something inside him told him it was time. He had come full circle. From dusty streets to golden stages, from the boy who was too small to the man who lifted a nation's heart. But now, he didn't come to play. He came to give something back. He was alone at first, dressed simply in a soft jacket and sneakers. No cameras, no crowd. Just the hum of cicadas in the trees and the breeze brushing the tall grass. This wasn't about attention. It was about peace. He walked slowly to the center, the same place where, as a child, he once stood waiting for a pass that never came. Now, there was no ball, just his heartbeat, steady and full, and the quiet knowledge that he had lived every inch of his dream. Behind him, a group of children gathered invited, but not told why. They were part of a local academy. Some had big dreams. Some were shy. Some came just to feel included. And then, when they saw Messi, their eyes lit up not in shock, but in soft disbelief. The kind of joy that can't be shouted. He turned, waved, and smiled. Walked to them gently, like a teacher more than a star. He sat with them under the shade of a tree. Listened to their stories, their fears, their hopes. And then he said something simple. "You're already enough." Later, he stood up and looked around. This place, this small, worn field, had started it all. Not because it was perfect, but because it had given him space to believe, to fall, to rise, to begin. He had made a decision, one that had been growing slowly, like a quiet seed. He wanted to build something here, not a stadium, not a museum, but a place where small kids could feel big, a home for forgotten dreams. A month later, construction began. A youth center, a field, a library. Nothing flashy, everything thoughtful. Messi didn't name it after himself. He named it after Celia's Corner. He visited every week. Not as a celebrity, but as a mentor. He walked with kids, tied shoes, showed them how to pass with care. Not for glory, but for each other. He reminded them that football isn't about fame, it's about connection. His sons helped paint the walls. His wife brought lemonade on warm afternoons. Neighbors brought flowers, and some, quietly, brought tears. Because in that little corner of Rosario, something had been healed. The world kept asking him, "Is this your retirement?" He would smile softly and say, "No, it's just the start of something different." Because the truth was, Messi had never stopped playing. He had just changed fields, traded goals for guidance, traded applause for presence. There was one final match. Not official, not televised. Just him, his children, his cousins, and a few old friends from the neighborhood. They played barefoot, laughing, falling, running, without rules. And for a moment, Messi was 9 again. At sunset, he sat on the porch of his family's home. The house had been repainted, but the soul remained. The wind carried the scent of grilled bread and wildflowers. He held a cup of mate in one hand, and in the other, his notebook. He opened it one last time, flipped to the first page. Read the words he had once written in nervous ink. "I hope I make her proud." And now, in older handwriting, he added, "I think I did." He closed the book, not to forget, but to let the story breathe. Because sometimes, the most beautiful chapters are the ones that stay quietly in our hearts. Whispered, not shouted. As the stars appeared, his sons asked, "Papa, will you ever play again?" He smiled and said, "I never stopped." And they didn't need to understand every word. They just leaned into him, heads resting on his arms. The greatest team he ever built that night, Messi walked alone to the field once more. No lights, just moonlight. He stood at the center, closed his eyes, and softly said, "Thank you." He said it to the ball, to the pain, to the cheers and the tears, to every hand that held him up when he stumbled. And most of all, to the boy who never stopped believing. The boy who was once too small, too quiet, too unsure, but who learned that love doesn't measure height, it measures heart. And that was something Messi had never run out of. His story didn't end with a whistle, it ended in motion. In every child who now wears his number, not to copy him, but to carry forward the feeling, the hope, the softness, the strength and stillness, the belief that even if you're quiet, you can still be heard. And as the wind passed through the trees, it almost sounded like applause. Not loud, not stadium-sized, but enough. Enough to echo through the night. Enough to say, "You did well. Now you can rest." So what part of your story are you still running from? Because maybe, like Messi, you're not behind. You're just becoming. And tonight, you can rest too.